What's up, you guys? Chet Guthrie with What the Chet here, coming to you all from the one, the only Drinking Poet Media Studios. Anyway, guys, I have been away from the camera on this side of my channel, or I should say one of my 3 channels. Y'all are probably wondering where I've been. If you keep up with the main channel, you all will definitely know. I had an opportunity with a friend of mine. His name is Lee. He runs a video production company based out of Jacksonville called Flying Ostrich Media. And we had an opportunity to film a commercial that will air on Hulu and during the Iceman games. The commercial on what it's about, it's called Hearts for Minds. It is a mental health advocacy group that is based out of Jacksonville. And anyway, just a really great cause to drive 6.5 hours to be in a commercial. I'll probably hear something probably about the next week or so. I'm kind of hoping that it happens in the next week or so. I know the commercial, they said it would probably air about 3 months down the road. But anyway, now that I am back in front of the camera, I've got some exciting stuff for you guys. Since I was down in Florida, and if you all have kept up with me on my other channels, you all will know that I lived in Florida for about 3 years. That is where the origins of my channel came from, or my presence on YouTube came from. And I kind of thought, I lived in St. Augustine long enough. Well, I lived in Jacksonville long enough. I went to St. Augustine just about every other day, and I even worked there. So I got a feel of all the different tourist locations. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to make a top 10 best tourist destinations in the oldest city in America, St. Augustine, Florida. Yes, St. Augustine goes as far back as 1565, and if you want to go get technical with it, it even goes as far back as Hernando de Soto when he came to America. But you guys, I do want to note that in this top 10, I have excluded anything related to ghost tours or free events. All this stuff, all those will be in a different video, or different videos, I should say. And the stuff I will talk to you all about tonight, it is different daytime tour stuff that you can do and just have a lot of fun with. And now that I have kind of given my spiel, let's get to it. And my number 10 thing to do in St. Augustine is Ripley's Believe It or Not. And you see, throughout the country, there are quite a few Ripley's Believe It or Nots. But this particular Ripley's Believe It or Not, this was the very first Ripley's auditorium in the entire United States. And even Ripley himself, he wanted the house, well, originally it was a house, and he wanted to turn that into his museum. Now, a little bit of history on the building behind Ripley's Believe It or Not. The castle was actually built by an architect who actually worked for Henry Flagler. He designed the hotels that if you go down today, like Flagler College. It was his house. Later on, it would be turned into a hotel as well. It actually suffered 2 burnings throughout the 1940s. And we'll probably get into it in another video. But the Ripley's Auditorium in St. Augustine is an amazing piece of history. It's where everything started. And really, if you look hard enough, some of its best pieces or its best displays are in that museum. It's really cool. They also have a ghost tour. All in all, Ripley's Believe It or Not, it's, how do you say it? Believe it or not. Now, we will get on to number 9. And number 9 is the St. Augustine Pirate Museum. It's like the Pirate Museum and Maritime Museum. Anyway, this was a museum that I couldn't quite remember the family's name who created it. It had different sunken ship artifacts. It had a 60-pound bar of silver. Well, why am I talking? It has a 60-pound bar of silver on display that you can pick up. That came from the Atocha. You also have a big cluster of coins that at one time there were only 4 in existence. Now there's only 1. They got broken down, sadly. And that block of coins was actually featured on Pawn Stars. Some other stuff. It also had the sword of One-Eyed Willie from the Goonies. It had a really cool display of Pirates of the Caribbean. And every display that it had, it made you feel like you were on a pirate ship. I really recommend it. It's really cool. It's pretty awesome. Also in the gift shop, they do have some doubloons that you can buy that came off the Atocha and other shipwrecks. Kind of pricey, usually around $3,500, kind of pricey. But just all in all, it's just an amazing museum. And I feel like I could say a lot on some of what we're talking about. Going on to number 8, and that is Marineland. Now, Marineland, its story goes all the way back to the 1950s, 1960s. And it was a group of investors that decided to create a underwater movie studio. In order to create some of the underwater scenes throughout cinema, throughout the 50s, the 60s, even going into present day, this is what Marineland started as. And while they were using Marineland, that's when they found out that dolphins were very intelligent. That's where scientists and Hollywood came together. They would train these dolphins. They realized you could train dolphins to eat as a treat, almost like a dog. But dolphins are way more intelligent. I think a dolphin has about the brain of a 12-year-old. Very intelligent creatures. But it would be further up on in the list. Why I say that is in the early 2000s, Marineland went through a renovation. They took out all of the older displays, all the older exhibits, which gave it its charm. It even had an IMAX theater. But what had happened, I believe it was around the early 2000s, they took all that out and they replaced it with a big, giant dolphin area. Now you can pay to swim with dolphins. It's kind of expensive, but all in all, present day, it's still really, really cool. You can, like I said, you can swim with dolphins. You can. They do have other exhibits now. They are trying to get back to what they were back in the day, I guess, as some people would put it. But now let's go on to number 7. Number 7, we're going back into downtown St. Augustine, Florida. And probably one of the coolest museums you can see down there. And it is from the Gilded Age. That is the Littner Museum. Now, the Lightner Museum, tomato, tomato, you could either call it the Littner Museum or the Lightner Museum. But either way, this was a hotel that was created by a man who owned, originally it's the Hotel Alcazar. And what the Hotel Alcazar was, it was a big giant hotel, and it was very successful up until the Great Depression, up until it closed its doors pretty much. And around that time, I believe it was 1934, 1935, Otto von Littner, who owned a magazine, it was a hobbies magazine. He bought the museum, or he bought the hotel, which by this time was just sitting empty, and he turned it into a museum. And it's a really great look into what the Gilded Ages were like. Even Theodore Roosevelt, well, I don't think it was Theodore Roosevelt, but there is a lion, I believe it was Winston Churchill's lion, and it even has a mummy. I think that's maybe why it's a little bit farther up on this list, but yes, the Littner Museum has a mummy. Pretty neat. But going on down to number 6, and that is the St. Augustine Aquarium. Now on this list already, we've already talked about one aquarium, but really what I feel with the St. Augustine Aquarium, it's off the main road going into St. Augustine. If you get off the interstate, you'll pass it. But it has it has a good feel of what the original Marineland was at one point. And it is also it's also a place that's a bit more on a budget if you want to swim with fish. They have a big giant tank. I think it has over 400,000 gallons it holds. But they have cow nose stingrays. They have reef fish. They have I'm trying to think of the other types of fish species that they have. But you can swim with these fish only for about $38, and it's a lot of fun. And they also give tours of tide pools, and they also have nurse sharks, which, both nurse sharks and stingrays that you can pet and feed. It's an interesting experience. I mean, I remember when my family went in 2019, and I liked it a bit more than Marineland, just because Marineland felt a little more expensive. But as I say, the St. Augustine Aquarium is it's really big on education while also giving the tourists a good bang for their buck. Now we are going we're getting into the meat. We're halfway through this list. And the next one that I want to talk about, it's also a very big one. Making this list was kind of hard. Kind of hard, kind of not. But number 5 is the Alligator Farm. And the Alligator Farm in St. Augustine is one of the oldest tourist destinations in Florida. Like, they have a lot of interesting things. From the 80s up until the early 90s, they had the largest crocodile. Yeah, it was the largest crocodile living in captivity in the entire world. His name was Gomek, and he lived to be about 85 years old. He lived far beyond what they expected him to live, but he was about 18 feet long. He was a really, really big alligator. Now, present day, there is another alligator that sits in his tank. He's nowhere near as big. He's about 15 feet long. But if you want to talk about a really cool place where you can see wildlife, such as some of the animals that you would see in Africa, they've got a good display of that. They've got other alligators, and they have a lot of interesting shows. Like, it's one of those things that you really just have to see it to believe it. But other than that, plus they also do alligator feedings. That's really cool. And they also have some albino alligators. Really neat. But all in all, if you want a good feeling of what old school tourism was like in St. Augustine, then the Alligator Farm is something that you would want to see. But now that we are getting into the top 4. Number 4 is the Fountain of Youth. Now, the Fountain of Youth, if you all do not know, one of the parties of Spanish conquistadors, were going into St. Augustine, they were looking for the Fountain of Youth. And this Fountain of Youth that is in St. Augustine, it is considered what might have been the original Fountain of Youth. It was inland. It's a freshwater spring, but it has a lot of it's got a lot of what do you call it? Anyway, it's got a weird taste to it. And if you're not careful, it'll also do something to your gut, and you don't want that. It's not fun. It was also where the Timucuan Indians were believed to have had a village set up in. Also at this site, at the Fountain of Youth, this is also believed where, well, not Hernando de Soto, but anyway, long story short, where the conquistadors made a landing in St. Augustine, and thus named it St. Augustine. Also, some other things that are here at the Fountain of Youth, they also have a big, giant Earth globe, and it shows like the passage from Spain to get to Florida. I mean, it's a really cool experience, and really for its time, it was the only one in existence. And I believe this globe stands about maybe 2 stories tall. There is also a room where you can look at the stars and what was navigated at the time. Also, there is a room, an archaeological room, showing where a Timucun burial site was. It's one of those things that if you want a real feel for St. Augustine, that's the place to go, the Fountain of Youth. But anyway, now we're getting into the last three. And these last three, I mean, if you've gone to Florida or if you've gone to St. Augustine, these are probably going to be in your top three as well. Excuse me. But number 3 is the St. Augustine Lighthouse. Now, if you want to talk about something really cool, the St. Augustine Lighthouse, it is one of 3 lighthouses that has been in St. Augustine. For a time, back during the days of the Spaniards, you had one that was made of wood. That burned down. Then later on, there was a lighthouse that was made out of coquina and concrete. That one eventually fell. And this lighthouse has been around probably since about 1876. Anyway, it is one of the tallest lighthouses in Florida, and it's about 198 steps. It also has a lot of really, really cool artifacts and exhibits. They do a lot of work with electrolysis, cleaning up the artifacts that were found off the ocean floor. And they also do a lot of really cool events. During the Christmas time, the Night of Lights, they light up the entire lighthouse. It's filled with Christmas trees. The entire premises is lit up. It's really pretty. But throughout the year, it's also known as one of the most haunted places in the U.S. This is where ghost hunters saw a apparition looking down at them from I'd probably say about 150 feet up in the air. So it's got a lot of interesting things, but in terms of just a maritime piece of history, that by itself is really amazing, and it probably will be featured on the next video that I will be doing. But going on to number 2, we are coming to the end. And that number 2 is the Old City Jail. Now, the Old City Jail, it's off San Marco Avenue, and there's a really cool tour that they do with that. But the history behind that jail is it was created by Henry Flagler. And what had happened is when Henry Flagler built the Flagler Hotel, or his pride and his joy, well, he didn't realize that he had built it right next to the city jail. And a lot of these people that were coming out of jail, technically it was the bad side of town at this time as well, they would cheat rich people out of their money. So what Henry Flagler did is he paid the city $30,000, I think it was around $30,000, and they had a beautiful Victorian state-of-the-art jail built on the outskirts of town. In fact, this jail could often be mistaken as the hotel itself, just by how nice it was. But the jail is an awesome museum. It gives you an idea of what old life was like for prisoners in the hot Florida sun, the Florida prison farms. If you go on the tour, it shows you how they lived, how they ate, which mainly was just like these bricks, not fun. But another interesting thing that is also on this list is it is also extremely haunted. In fact, you could say it is the most haunted building in St. Augustine. But I recommend, if you are going to go into St. Augustine, that's going to be one of the places that you will want to see. It's really cool. It's filled with a lot of history, and it shows what life was like during the Victorian era and the Gilded Age. And I just want to add one more thing before we get into number one, and that is an honorable mention that's more or less on the outskirts of St. Augustine. And some people would probably say it's not even in St. Augustine. But that is Fort Matanzas. Now, Fort Matanzas is a smaller rendition of the Castillo de San Marcos that's in downtown St. Augustine. It is a free event, or well, I won't say it's free. The National Park Service, they do recommend, or they do suggest a $5 donation. Keeps the lights on and the boats going, but we'll talk about that probably later on in another video. But I just felt like I wanted to add Fort Matanzas just because of what we're about to talk about. And the last thing on my list, number one, the best thing you can do in St. Augustine is the Castillo de San Marcos. And you must be wondering, Chet, why do you choose the Castillo de San Marcos? Well, in making this video, I thought, what would be at least one thing you could do to say that you went to St. Augustine and you got to experience its history in such a way that it was memorable? Like if I talked to somebody and just said, hey, Chet, or hey, if you want to go to St. Augustine, do this one thing, and that is the Castillo de San Marcos, or as known by locals as simply the fort. The fort was built in 1568, I think it was either 1565, I think it was around 1568. But anyway, for many, many years, the Castillo de San Marcos was the place that protected all the citizens of St. Augustine, all the colonists from Spain, even during the times when the British had control of St. Augustine. And then it went back to the Spanish and then went to America. Back and forth, I guess you could say. But the Castillo really shows people what it was like when the Spaniard conquistadors first came to this country all those years ago, and they needed a place of safety. So the Castillo de San Marcos, it was built out of coquina, and coquina is a very spongy type of concrete. And for a lot of different forces that were trying to take over Florida, especially St. Augustine, they could not take the fort because, well, they've tried firing their cannonballs from their ships. It would smack and it wouldn't come out. So that's why I say that the Castillo is the number one thing you can do in St. Augustine. And also, it's as if the fort and St. Augustine are very synonymous with one another. But as I digress, you guys, that is my top 10 best things that you can do in the oldest city in America. Anyway, I had a lot of fun doing this. I really thought about this. Got a little bit behind on my videos, and I know I needed to pick things up. But anyway, guys, remember, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Always means a lot. Goes to show that y'all care, and they all want to see more awesome videos. So without further ado, you guys, this What the Chet video is over.